In a series of painful forced marriages, Rolls-Royce emerged as the leading engine manufacturer, and the 20 aerospace companies were whittled down to two main groups, Hawker Siddeley and BAC, the British Aircraft Corporation. It would be down to BAC to mount the final British challenge to Boeing for the big jet market. In 1962, a new British star took to the air, polished, refined, with a license to thrill. It was Britain's final riposte to the brash Americans. It was powerful, Savile Row suited. The name was VC-10.
The VC-10 was a magnificent aircraft. There should be no question about that. It looks absolutely superb, whether you see it on film or in the tin. It's a delight. It's a piece of aviation sculpture. There's something thrilling in the way it took off like a jet fighter rather than a lumbering Airbus of today. VC-10, romance in the sky, adventure, boy's own, Dander, the Eagle, all those things, utterly thrilling.
The VC-10 does do a very different job to the Boeing. It's been designed to operate out of the short airfields with high temperature conditions, which are so important to large airlines like BOAC on the Commonwealth routes.
Why was it necessary to come into this market at all?
Well, the big jet market is a great part of the airline scene, and I think if we are to preserve the aircraft industry, which is a great national asset, it exports perhaps £150 million a year, we need to develop an aircraft like the VC-10.
The last of the all-British great jets has to be the VC-10, and this was a final riposte to the Americans. They brought us the 707, which for decades was going to dominate aviation. We hit back with a plane which was much more sophisticated in its design.
Well, the VC-10 looked wonderful. It had its engines at the back, so the cabin was supremely quiet. It was fast. In fact, I think it's still a world record holder for a subsonic airliner flight. So it was quick, it was comfortable, and it could go almost anywhere.
It's astonishing that 50 years later, only Concorde has crossed the Atlantic faster than our last great passenger jet.
I do this trip from Nairobi to London every year, and this is by far the most quiet and most comfortable one I can remember.
The VC-10 was deeply loved by passengers, and that was a great selling point. It's very seldom you get people coming off aircraft saying what a wonderful aircraft that was, but they really did on the VC-10. People would actually ask to fly on it and would postpone their flights if they couldn't.
I think it's an extremely comfortable plane, very smooth, very quiet. The seating is most comfortable and plenty of legroom.
It seems to travel so serenely. When you hit turbulence, it doesn't ride turbulence like other airliners. It has a very, very stiff wing, so it doesn't juggle you about like the average aircraft. And of course, the one major advantage the aeroplane always had and made it so successful was the fact that the engines were on the tail. So of course, consequently, it's a very quiet interior. Also, for a nervous person who doesn't really like flying, the aircraft could take off 2/3 quicker than a 707. So consequently, you're 1,000 feet above the runway where the 707 was still sitting on it.
The VC-10 was sold on its passenger experience, and part of this was down to the cabin crew. They also preferred the aircraft to the 707.
When you compared it to the 707, which I also went on for a short period, it was the most amazing aircraft, the VC-10, because it was neat, it was small, it was very fast, and it was only 144 passengers, but it was the latest jet plane, you know, that everyone was quite excited to fly in.
The 707 was much noisier, and also the landing was, well, I always think it was a controlled crash all the time. Bang, bang, bang down the runway. Whereas the VC-10 was very smooth. It glided off and it glided down. It was very smooth. I think the passengers preferred the VC-10.
The hostesses may have loved the aircraft, but were not always so keen on the designer uniforms.
Favourite dresses were on this route. I'm sure it's New York down to the Caribbean.
Yeah.
and you were issued with this paper dress. So in New York, even if it was snowing, you trot onto the aircraft. We had these big raincoats, big sort of military raincoats. But when you took the raincoat off, you were wearing this paper dress. They're more or less all the same size, and they did up with string at the back. So if you had any bust, it just stuck straight out in front. And they had to be, I think, 2 or 3 inches above the knee you were supposed to wear them. We were actually issued with tights then. And, of course, all the boys used to get the scissors out and try and cut them shorter and shorter. Green plastic shoes with plastic jewels on and a flower in your hair. Hideous.
Horrendous.
Hideous. And there's a row of 3 VC-10s, and you don't know which one you were on. So you trot up the steps and say, "Are you going down the Caribbean?" All shy and flustered, and they say, "Why?" And you go like this, because your paper dress. No, it's not that one, dear, it's that one.
Yet once again, Britain was making a technically advanced aircraft to the specifications of one company. A company, BOAC, that was often referred to as the Boeing-only Aircraft Corporation. Such was its addiction to buying the Seattle jets. No British aircraft could succeed without the backing of the state airlines, and relying on that could be a pact with the devil. The BBC's Money programme interviewed Britain's own Dr. No, the chairman of BOAC. He damned the VC-10 with faint praise.
It's a lovely aeroplane to fly. I've flown it myself. I think it has one little drawback, and that is that you have to get an awful lot of extra people in it before it makes money.
It's a really sad story that BOAC, who specified the aeroplane, turned against it when they realised that the 707 was actually more economical to fly. The reason it was more economical to fly was because the 707 had been built for very long runways. The VC-10 had been designed specifically for BOAC's requirement to get out of shorter runways at high altitude in places like Nairobi on the Empire routes. So it had a bigger wing with high lift devices and the tail-mounted engines. This made it heavier and therefore burned a bit more fuel. So BOAC actually tried to get out of part of their VC-10 order in order to buy more 707s, which didn't really help its image with the rest of the world when you were trying to sell it to other airlines.
The airline corporations were more or less strong-armed into buying British. They had probably an excessive influence on the design of the aircraft because they were tailored for BOAC's needs, BEA's needs, without looking at the wider world as a market. So the aircraft were too closely tailored. And then, inevitably, minds changed, commerce developed, and the airlines didn't then really quite want what they'd said they wanted. And in the end, airlines tend to go for operating costs and reliability rather than the last bit of perfection.
The American 707 went on to sell over 1,000. The British VC-10, a mere 54. A proud line of all British big jets to challenge the Americans had come to an end.